Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Business of Joy. And I have an incredible guest today, Michael Ciannilli, and he and I met at a National Speaker Association meeting years ago. But Mike, welcome to the show. And why don't you just do a quick introduction of who you are and what your background is? It's so fascinating.
Well, thank you, Lisa. It's great to see you again. It's been quite a long time since we met in person, and very happy to be here today. So thank you for the invitation for that. Yes, so I've had a very thankful for a 30-year career in the space program, working everything from engineering sides of launch operations to actually the test director role of leading launch countdown. And then the last 10 years of my career has been focused on the safety portion of what we do. So kind of the three legs of that stool, the engineering, operations, and safety. And then now I have the tremendous honor and joy of taking the lessons learned, the 30 years of NASA's history, when times went well, when times didn't go so well, and sharing those with a host of industries and organizations across the country and the world so they can learn from us and then increase their mission success and safety going forward.
Oh my gosh, Mike. And this is why I'm so excited for this. Let me just give everybody a little bit of the backstory. So, I was at my first ever National Speaker Association meeting in 2022. And Mike, you took the stage, and I remember it so well. You're like, wow, I'm speaking in front of a group of speakers. So I remember that you said that, but we reached out on LinkedIn, but your message about the lessons learned, it is so powerful and it's so aligned with what I do because, like you said, through the good and the bad, that's what we have to learn from. And that's why I wrote my book, The Business of Joy, The Lessons Learned, Untold Lessons, in fact. But yeah, so this is why this I'm so excited. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a long time, Mike. So thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to do that.
It is my pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, well, let's jump in. So I do want to start with my favorite question, which is I like to understand people's backstories. And so I want to know what your first job is. So whether it was paper routes, mowing lawns, whatever, like what was your earliest job?
Wow, that's a good question. I got to think back a little bit. As I get older and older, it gets harder and harder to go back that farther, right? Um, my first job is actually working. We had a family business, and what my dad did and my family did with my uncle is he rented out office spaces, had an office building and apartments, and it was interesting because we'd always have new tenants in the apartments, and we'd have new tenants in the office building. So I spent a lot of days, a lot of weekends remodeling with him, getting ready for, one day it was a barber shop, next day it was a clinic, or next day it was an office for a business. So we had to constantly rip down walls and build walls and make it for the client. So it was always based on we got to move quick. Saturdays and Sundays weren't anything special. They were one day of the week. And so I think early on, I really learned work was very important. We had to do what had to be done. So again, if it wasn't, doesn't matter if it was Saturday morning early, you got up and dad needed help, my uncle needed help, and you went to work and you put in long days. But I learned a lot about that and a lot about customer satisfaction. So when we delivered that apartment to that new family, or when we delivered that office to the new company moving in, it was spot on perfect for them. So I remember a lot of days working hard, swinging a hammer and carrying a lot of stuff and going home really tired each of those days.
Well, and how old were you, Mike, when you did
Wow.
that?
Uh, Probably started around 10, 11.
Wow, that's
Working in the
young.
early days was just carrying stuff, maybe to the dumpster. And then as I got older, I got taught some of the skills of here's how you use the screw gun and the hammered nails, and here's how you build a wall, and learn some of those construction trades. Um,
Well,
and
it's a couple things that are so fascinating because I always love to see then if there's this through line, into later in life. But it's interesting because my husband's in real estate. And so, it's the idea of make ready. You got to do the make readies for the apartments or the offices. And so there's something about that transformation too, right? Where, especially in the office building, seeing the same space have to be completely changed and renovated and for a completely different purpose. I mean, do you feel like you might not have realized that as a kid, but now looking back, are there some interesting lessons about that experience about transformation, I guess?
yeah, that's a great question, Lisa. As I think about it, I think there are because there was so much creativity. I remember walking into a space and it looked completely different. It was either an open, barren space with nothing there. And my dad would say, okay, this is going to be a barber shop. And as a little kid, you're like, well, there's no barber shop. I don't see any chairs. I don't see the mirror, all those things you normally see,
Right.
or being in or a dance studio or something different. And or it was one of the other things. And then we have to transform this space into something completely 180 degrees opposite of what it was. And as a kid, you kind of shake your head saying, I'm not too sure about this, you know? And then all of a sudden you sit back and you listen and you learn and you watch something being built and created out of either nothing or transformed very different. And then turns into something beautiful. And I learned really, I think through that, that anything is possible. You know, if the tenant needs two spaces, well, then you take two places down, you make one out of it, or if the tenants want something different, extra bedroom for an extra child, then you make an extra bedroom. And I think really, I learned early on that you can transform anything. You have to be flexible, and you have to work hard,
Mm.
but you really can create anything. So it's interesting how those early lessons and experiences in life teach you things that are so invaluable that you really pick up on later in very different mediums.
And I think the other part of it, Mike, to me, and again, you tell me, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I wonder if as a kid, then you're like, wait a minute, I just did all this hard work and now I have to tear it up. Like, did,
Yeah.
as a kid, maybe that was something you thought about.
That was hard because you think of all those Saturdays when you want to go out there and play, or Sundays and all that hard work and blood, sweat, and tears, if you will. And then all of a sudden, you learn that things change pretty quick, right? So maybe that tenant that you thought was going to be there for a couple of years or a long time, things change with that. So now you have to get ready for something else and move quick. And you don't have all that time, like you mentioned. Real estate, you got to pivot quick, and you got to approach from a different angle. And even though you may see something you built that you were pretty proud of, and you thought they would stand the test of time, right? Like it'd be as long as the pyramids, right? When you're a kid, that's going to be there forever. You realize in life that doesn't usually typically work. And then you've got to be agile and quick, and you got to move. And then you get ready for that. And then it becomes a challenge. I think as I got a little older, I didn't see it quite as well. Why are we tearing it down? We just spent a couple weeks building it. But then you see it as a challenge. Well, heck, if there's a new tenant coming in, maybe we can do that in a couple of days. Maybe we can transform this space. So I think it became a challenge subliminally over time to make that tear down a little bit easier.
Isn't that fascinating though? And I'll tell you a story that I have not thought about my own life was so I have three children and I love to paint. And so I painted this gigantic mural on my son's, he's the oldest, my son's wall in his nursery, and it was of Noah's Ark. So if you
Oh,
can
wow.
imagine this like full size, took one whole wall and I
Life size.
yeah, I painted it on the wall. And it was something that, took a lot of time and energy and care and just, it was just perfect. And then, of course, as he got older, I had to paint over it. And so I was like, okay, I took pictures of it, but it's not the same. So, but my lesson, on our theme of lessons learned,
Mhm.
for my next two kids, I painted it on a canvas. So I painted a gigantic, clown for one daughter, and then another daughter was like a big Winnie the Pooh scene, and I did it on canvas, so then I could take it off the wall. And so the clown I still have, and the Winnie the Pooh I still have. So you learn lessons, right, about because it was sad to paint over that wall.
Absolutely. I'll have to take a look at those pictures of Noah's Ark sometime. That's pretty impressive that you can
Yeah,
construct something like
and
that. It's interesting, those early lessons or those moments in life. And because life is constant change, right? We're surrounded by change. And that's something I focus on in my talks as well as change and how to adapt to it and how to look out for good and bad change. So at least it's a perfect story of how these little things in life, even in our personal lives, play such a pivotal role in learning and growing as we move
yeah.
through life.
Well, and then you learn, and to your point, you pivot. But let me ask you, so in school, what was your favorite subject, Mike? And then what was your least favorite in school? I'm talking like early, not college, but like early days, like, maybe middle school, high school.
Yeah, I love school. I really did. I think I gravitated, of course, to science. I loved science tremendously. Science was really a wonderful thing. I think on maybe the left side of my brain, if you will, and then history.
Hmm.
I loved history on the right side, and history and psychology. I think were two things that really I found fascinating in high school, and So it's kind of a balance. The left brain and the right brain, I think, kind of came together in some kind of unique way in both directions.
So, and again, that's another through line too, because obviously, the science, obviously with NASA, and then the history part, which is, making sure we learn from the past, and like you said, in the good times and the bad times. But with growing up, where did you grow up? I forgot to ask that. Where did you
Yeah,
grow
I grew up actually upstate New York, so near Syracuse, New York, a little town called Brewerton. So it's a little town upstate New York. I grew up on a lake, Oneida Lake, which is the lake in the center of the state. So
up?
I really grew up in a very kind of small rural environment, very small town. I was surrounded by a lot of water, so every day was spent either on a boat, near a boat, on a dock, and just having that wide open spaces, a lot of hiking in the woods, and so anything outdoors, anything with the water just feels great to me. Um, and I, look back at it now. At the time, you don't think about it as a kid, but a lot of imagination. You didn't have a lot of the folks that grew up in cities that have a lot of the stimulus that kind of comes at them, and really there you kind of had to paint your landscape, if you will, to take a metaphor
Yeah.
from some of your hobbies there. But you really did a lot of daydreaming and a lot of thinking because you just again had a lot of open water and a lot of open sky, and give you a lot of time to think. And of course, in the days before smartphones and other devices to take some of your attention, I think you kind of had to create your own imagination, your own kind of vision of the future.
So did you ever did you dream of working for NASA when you were a kid, or how did you land at NASA?
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting story because I get that question a lot. Is what was a seminal moment, or who talked to you, or what did you see on television? And for me, I cannot honestly remember a time that I didn't want to work for NASA or launch rockets. And I've asked my folks about that, and they said from the earliest days they can remember that's all I ever talked about.
Wow.
Went from dinosaurs to rockets, and that's all I ever talked about. And they said I would come home as a little kid off my bike and just, you got to put the TV set on. And they would do that, and the launch would be going off. And of course, this was early on. This was probably back in the Skylab days. But they said somehow you knew there was a launch going on. And I honestly don't know how I knew that.
Wow.
But I remember just sitting there for hours, either watching NASA documentaries or launch activity. And I really don't have a pivotal moment. It was just something that felt just part of me. And it's a strange way to describe it, but it wasn't a moment or a choice. It kind of was just built or cooked in the system somehow, it feels like.
Well, that's funny that you even use that word, cooked in the system, because it's funny. Well, you think about the intersection of all the things that you enjoyed, and probably even just going back to that, the apartments and the offices and the transformation. And you couldn't, there's no bigger transformation than like going to space and, understanding the science and then learning all of that. So it's fascinating. But had you really ever thought about how those early days of apartments and real estate and all that impacted who you became?
Yeah, it's interesting. I have in different ways, and as I get older, I think I draw more parallels, which is kind of interesting as you kind of see your life in different perspectives. Um, my family, very hardworking, and I think my drive, because it wasn't an easy path to get to where I wanted to go. Getting in my career was very difficult. So I think, and then my career was a challenging career with a lot of hours and a lot of, it's a little stressful sometimes launching rockets, right? So I think when I look back and I think of like my grandfather, who was 8-year-old boy who came over from Italy, built his own business at age 16.
Wow.
And which is just crazy for me to think about. Another grandfather worked in a coal mine at that age. So very hardworking people. And I was really through stories of learning about them and talking to them, and then through my dad, who was my absolute hero in life, starting different businesses and trying not only apartments, but the first drive-in restaurant in the 1950s, and all different kinds of businesses and building homes. And so I learned a lot about hard work. That was just an expectation, and it was all around me. My mom worked hard, my dad worked hard, and just
Yeah.
so I think all of that early development is it just became very normal for me. Like I said, Saturdays and Sundays were we had fun, of course, but it was work. And if it was 10 o'clock at night and a tenant called, or you went to work and you fixed the plumbing, and no different than, I got a call at 2 o'clock in the morning that there's a problem with the rocket. You pick up the phone, you drive into work, and you fix the rocket. So I think, Lisa, that's a really interesting question. And again, as more I think about it through the lens of being a little bit older, it really was kind of developed who I became through, grandparents and parents. And then I really appreciate and thank my dad, mom, and that, and my grandparents, because that would really help formulate who I am. And I think it really helped me at those mornings, again, at 2 o'clock in the morning, getting that phone call and a set and want to roll over and go back to sleep. Um,
It's just what
uh,
you do. You get out of bed and you go fix it. I
yeah,
mean,
jump up, yeah, and you go in and you go do it, and because it needs to be done. And so, yeah, exactly right. And I think those formative experiences helped me prepare for a career that was a pretty demanding career. And so, yeah, it's interesting how they both tie together.
it is. And my husband, trust me, as a property manager, we got those calls at 2 in the morning. And, sadly, there are not very many of these, but, there's a fire or a break-in, and,
Mhm.
he's got to go out there and wait for somebody to board it up. And, it's 2 in the morning, and that's just what you do.
And you never
Thankfully.
know what it is, right? It could be, like you said, a fire, a break in, a water break,
Mm.
and you just fix it. So that, another perfect time is you don't know what's around the corner when that phone rings. It could be a whole host of problems, and you got to be ready to just take it on, whatever it is, and fix it. And that really is a great lesson for life, right? Because life just can change on a dime. So being ready for those calls, like you said, your husband had, and
Oh
yeah,
yes. And now as he's gotten, developed in his career, we have property managers that the tenants call versus us. So it's a good thing. But
absolutely.
let's go ahead. I want to ask one other question before we really get into the NASA story. Was there a moment in your younger days, so think of it as high school or college or early careers, that I always call it like this stuck moment. Like you're like, what is going on? What am I doing? What's going on with my life? Am I doing the right thing? Like, did you ever have a stuck moment? And if so, how'd you get unstuck?
Wow, wow. Well, I don't know if I would use the word stuck, but I had a challenging half a decade
Mm,
that kind of parallels with that. And um, so interestingly, my whole life, like I mentioned, since I can remember, was I want to work in the space program. I want to launch rockets, right? That was my whole thing. So my whole early career had done that. My high school was all focused on that. My college was focused. I got the college closest to the Kennedy Space Center, and worked in a degree called space science and interned out there. So everything I do was focused 100%. I want to go work at the Kennedy Space Center, work at NASA, and launch rockets. And so I even had done, had met a bunch of people in the space program to, know where I'd want to work in the space program. So a lot of everything was done that. And then, one of those moments in life, and a hiring freeze got placed on just prior to graduation.
mm,
And so I figured, well, hiring freeze, okay, I graduate. Well, I'm not going to jump into my first job. It might take me a couple of weeks. Well, that couple of weeks went into a couple of months, went into a couple of years, and then went into 5.5 years.
mm.
And so you find yourself, with all this energy and all this dream and love and desire to do your dream job, and then you have external forces beyond your control. They weren't hiring anybody, and you have to figure out through the course of as that time went on. You had a lot of moments where you had a lot of self-reflection, and I didn't have a backup plan, if you will. I didn't have something, well, I could either do this or I could do this. I love them both. I love this,
Mm.
and not to overuse a phrase, but that old saying of, failure is not an option, right? I want to go do this, but as the months went on and the years went on, you have to really think about things, right? What am I going to do? And if this doesn't ever happen, so that was I don't know if it was a stuck moment, but it certainly gave me a lot of thinking of, a couple of different things of, how do I navigate this? It isn't a fun feeling when you can't attain your goals or your dreams. It can be very frustrating, and you kind of have to question yourself a lot. And it also made me kick into that perseverance mode of, I'm going to make this work somehow. I don't know how, but I'm going to get this goal. It's not going to stop me. And again, as the years went on, it became harder and harder in some ways because as you're trying everything, right, and nothing's working and nothing's changing, then you come to a crossroads and say, do I pivot and change, or do I keep fighting for this dream and this goal?
Well, so then
And
how did you feel? And that is such a powerful story. So it's those all the circumstances that are outside of your control. You had your eye on the prize, but hiring freezes and then just it's difficult. But so when that call or see, it was probably either a call because or email. Tell me how you felt when you finally got that acceptance or like, "Ah, I'm going to go work for NASA." Tell me
uh,
what was going through your mind?
you're gonna start getting me a little teary eyed here now. Yeah, I still remember that moment, Lisa, and thank you. It was magical, because it almost surreal, almost like, can this be real? Because you had so many times you had tried all different things, right, to make this work, and sometimes you got close, or got close, but you thought, oh, this is going to be the time, and then the door shuts, and a lot of those experiences. So I think part of it was a this can't be real. No, we've been down this path before, and something happened the last minute, so you're kind of a little bit trepidatious to get too excited because you're waiting for that trap door to open back up and kind of fall through it. So I think some of it was maybe disbelief, and then as it started to sink in, it was, oh my heavens, what does this mean now? Something you have dreamt about and thought about and fought so hard for so many years is now real. So what is this going to be like? The ride has started, right? It's like going to Disney World, and you're in there, and the bar's down, and all of a sudden it starts to move, the roller coaster. What's it going to be like? You have all these images in your head, what you think it's going to be like, but then now you're on the ride itself, and
Okay,
so
so
that's excitement.
I have one more question on that because I remember so like I worked at Frito-Lay PepsiCo and then I worked at Brinker, which is Chili's. And here's the thing. I remember because I was at Frito-Lay for 9 years and then I moved over to Chili's. And it was I came in as like the head of innovation. I literally remember Mike driving into that parking lot at Chili's for the first time going, "Oh my God." Like, because it's a company that, clearly in Dallas, always admired and it was this new role and it was a big job. And I never forget that feeling. So what was it like, just briefly? I mean, we don't want to go too far, but just briefly, when you drove in and you were parking in NASA for the first time.
Man, I'm gonna need some tissues pretty soon here. You know, it was overwhelming. Yeah, I remember you dreamt of getting your badge, right? Having a NASA badge, go and be able to go in. And I remember going there, and you go through the process, and they take your picture and go through all fingerprints and all the background checks and everything else. You get all this, and all of a sudden they hand you this badge. Man, this is a little hard to get through, but and then you get that feeling of, you look at it and go, that's my picture in there. Holy mackerel, really? That's me? And then you drive through the gates and they welcome you in.
Oh
And then
my
you start driving, and then you start seeing those iconic structures. You see the largest building in the world, the Vehicle Assembly Building. And then you look over here and you see launch pads, and you see rockets on those launch pads. And office,
God.
and then you go, I get to sit here. I get a desk, I get a chair. I actually get to be part of this. And I think, it's something over the years on different degrees. I've never stopped feeling that way. This is an honest true story. It's been over 30 years now that I've worked in the program in some fashion. And I still, when I go through those gates and I still look around, so many times I still feel like that little kid. I kid you not. And I've had so many experiences along the way, different moments, maybe during launch countdown, different points of my career. And you sit back and go, how did some little kid from New York end up here? So I've never lost that feeling. And I try to share that with people, especially young folks, when I go out and speak to school groups, is I always try to recommend, if I can give them some humble advice, is go find that for you. And what gets you excited? Is it in sports? Maybe it's remodeling apartments. It doesn't make a difference what it is. Go find what you love and get that feeling, because that feeling, there's nothing more exciting, more invigorating, and nothing more cool, to be frank, to have that feeling and to have it for so many decades. And I'm just so thankful that I got to feel it. I still get to feel it. And I want others to have that same experience that I have.
And of course, the word I would use is it's very joyful.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, because
Absolutely.
and I feel the same because I feel blessed for the job that I have, and I just feel like pinch me moment that I get to do what I do every day. But let's transition. Thank you for sharing that because to me, my son, I sent you a picture of my son in that little blue NASA uniform
I loved it. I loved it.
probably like 5 or 6 years old, and I still have it. He was five or
Oh,
six, and the pictures of him in that little uniform, and he's a mechanical engineer, and
of course.
it was just such a cool thing. But
Oh
let's
my
talk
God.
about your day-to-day world because the powerful stories. And just to give everybody a little background, so what Mike does is lessons learned and the good and the bad and the ugly. And it's such an important thing. But let's go ahead and just jump right into, I know the 2003 Columbia, and I had to take a big gulp here because I was watching when it happened. And you tell just some of those experiences about all of that. I mean, I'm not even sure where you want to begin on that, but I know you've probably shared this story before, but yeah, tell us a little bit about those lesson learned department that you ran.
Yeah. Yeah. It was really hard. So, my whole life was wanting to do this. I used to build models of Columbia as a kid. So Columbia and myself kind of have this connection. I'm very humbled and honored and thankful for. And during my early part of my career, I worked with Columbia. I worked on board Columbia. I spent many, many hours, many days on board Columbia, getting her ready for launch and then sitting launch countdown for launch activities. So when we launched Columbia and was on that launch team for the final flight, it was a very joyous moment because we had finally got Columbia off the ground. It was a long process to get that particular flight off, and we were very excited. So I remember working all night long through countdown, and she goes up in the beautiful blue sky, and it's like we'll see you back in a couple of weeks. And so it was a very joyous moment. And then of course, the day of the accident was a very dark, difficult day, weeks, and months, and years after the accident. So after the accident, and after we brought Columbia home, and there's a whole story to that too, um, intervening time. But fast forward 10 years after that, um, yeah, because I'd been overseeing the artifacts of Columbia, the administrator of NASA and our center director came to me and said, we want to build the nation's memorial to the Space Shuttle Challenger, Space Shuttle Columbia accidents. And would you lead that effort? And that's a tremendous honor to go do that. So I led a project called Forever Remembered. And if anybody ever gets to the Kennedy Space Center, you can come to the Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex, and Forever Remembered is there. And we have that national memorial to the crews. So during that experience of working at extremely intimate with the stories, with the families, and with the vehicles, I started really thinking deep about it and relying on the last 10 years before that of taking people in and answering the questions of what happened. A lot of the facts around the accidents, but a lot of the questions that folks were asking me, Lisa, started to morph into the whys. So instead of those other ones, it got into the why question, and it got me thinking more. And I start thinking, we're teaching a lot of the facts and figures, but we're not teaching really the why behind the scenes of why these happened. So after we finished Forever Remembered and opened it up to the world, I came up with this concept, pitched it to the administrator, and said, hey boss, I want to start a new NASA program, and I want to teach the lessons, but I want to teach them in a very different way. I want to teach them connecting the heart and connecting the mind together of why these things happen. So I built a program called the Apollo Challenger Columbia Lessons Learned Program, and built that, and for 10 years built it and led that program, and to a tremendous amount of amazing experiences with people, and to the NASA audience, most specifically NASA contractor and then commercial workforce, and then trying to do a little outreach to the outside world. But just the response back was fantastic. Again, trying to teach these lessons so we learn from these tragedies, and we don't repeat the mistakes. And then, of course, you take the 60, 70 years of NASA's good history that we've done things really spot on right, and then share with other folks and Lisa and share that with them so they can maybe take some of that into the workspace because their lessons are so translatable. It's not just launch operations, but they're so translatable to every industry. I could almost, I now I tell people, give me an industry, and I can guarantee I can make a connection for you of how these lessons that we learned through the space program are so applicable to other parts of life and other organizations.
So I have an interesting observation, and thank you so much because I know that that is tough. And when I heard you speak in 2022, and by the way, you did an amazing job. So anybody out there that's looking for an amazing speaker, Mike's your guy. But I just made an observation here, and it's fine, but I just want to tell you what I noticed. Your energy just changed massively. And I know it's a hard topic, but I'd like to understand at the core why it was so important for you to actually go to your boss and do that. Because it's the awe and wonderment and all those things of driving into NASA, and then the hard reality of what can go wrong. And it takes a special person, I think, to be able to call that out. And so I'd like to understand that moment or that thinking that says, God, this is really important. Because it's just interesting how I transitioned pretty hard from that glorious moment of seeing the awe and wonder of NASA to, okay, I'm just jumping right into the lessons learned. But there had to be something inside of you that's like, this is so important. I need to go do this.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and it's interesting when I talk to some folks after my speeches or media appearances, and folks will say that it kind of felt like a roller coaster experience, and it's really not only intentional, but it's also just it's the way it happened. It's a very difficult story in a lot of ways. Very you'll feel it in your stomach.
Yeah.
You just feel it deep down inside you. But there's also beautiful rays of joy and tremendously high highs that come out of it as well. So and I'll share that a little bit with you. So, for me, it was very personal. A lot of us that worked in the program was very personal because you spend a lot of your life. I had spent uh, probably more time with Columbia than I did with my family for a long time because you're on board the vehicles, you're working your hardest to make sure they're perfect as best they can be to perfect. You can't really get the perfect, but you get as close as you can to make sure they're ready. And then you meet the flight crews and you brief them. And you say, here's your vehicle that you're going to borrow for a couple of weeks. You're going to take it on a fantastical journey in outer space, and then bring it back to us, right, in good shape. So because we're going to use her again. So you have this experience, and when the vehicle doesn't come home and the crew doesn't come home, that's really painful. And you live through that, right? And you question yourself, why? What did I do wrong? How was it my fault? So you go through a lot of that emotional. And then I had the honor, very difficult duty, but honor to go in Texas with many other folks and search and to bring Columbia and the crew home. So you go through something very intimate, very personal and difficult, and then you learn what happened after that in their memory, and say, we're never going to let this happen again. Not on my watch. So it becomes very personal, Elisa, to have that into you. So that experience and then working forever remembered, it became even stronger and stronger working with the families, working with people, and saying, you know what, we've got to learn everything we can. In the crew's memory, we have to do that, and in the spirit of all the folks that are going to fly in future rockets, and all the folks on the ground, right? Because we do a lot of dangerous things in the space program. We can certainly hurt or kill a lot of people on the ground very quick. On a very unexpected moment on your best day, if you will. So we got to be very careful of that. So it became a mission of mine that we have to learn. We can't let this be forgotten. And it's hard. There's a lot of hard moments. It's still for me today hard in my talks to share certain things or answer certain questions. But what's important to me is that sunrise on the other side of the story. And as difficult as it is, if we really learn these lessons, and it doesn't matter if we learn them and apply them in our home with our families, it doesn't matter if we apply them in our workspace, but if we truly learn them, take them to heart, and make them part of our daily experience, we can help our mission success, which may mean a company doesn't have to lay off people, people keep their jobs, or main people that we keep people alive and safe, and people go home to their families at the end of the day. So to me, that's that beautiful sunrise at the end of the story that I try to leave my speeches and my talks with in media events. That this is a it's a difficult story, but it's a beautiful story because we're going to do something very powerful with these difficult moments, and we're going to make something happen, which is turning darkness into light.
This, wow. So I'm gonna need a tissue. I'm gonna need a tissue. And it's so powerful because all what you just described is why I wrote the book about the pandemic and the recovery, because there were so many lessons. And as our memories fade, it's sometimes you want to either sweep the bad stuff under the rug or you just don't remember it the way it really happened. Our memories are trained to be resilient, our brains to get through those tough times, but at the cost of the lessons learned sometimes. And so I think that that's such a powerful thing. But do you feel like that a lot of like, because you do speaking now and things like that, do you find that companies are resistant to shining a light on failures today?
Yeah, it's hard, right? It's a hard thing to do. It's hard for all of us, right? I mean, I look in the mirror sometimes, and you have to, come face to face and you look inside yourself too. So I think all of us on individual levels, looking in the mirror, or companies looking in the mirror, if you will. I think it's maybe a human trait, right? And companies are just large groups of human beings and people. So I think it's hard. Just it's built into us for that. So I think it comes with that. And I think it's incumbent upon us that have the opportunity to speak and share those lessons, how we approach that. And one way I do that that seems to be hopefully quite effective is I never go in and try to point fingers and say this is how you're doing something wrong. That's not my role, my job. What I try to do is share through the transparency of my stories and the stories of NASA and the space program, kind of share our difficult moments and kind of peel back the curtain and show very difficult things. And it's not easy even to share those, from my perspective, Lisa, because you're very vulnerable when you do that. You're sharing not your best moments, and times where you definitely could have done something better. But what gets us through, gets me through those moments of sharing those difficult stories where I could have done something better or our teams could have done something better, is that it's going to make a difference. And I think when you do that and you become vulnerable and you open up and you share that, one the authenticity comes through, but two, hopefully people and organizations see themselves through us. So the organizations and companies and groups that I go to may be very different. Maybe a banking institution or a construction company or a hospital or an insurance company. There's been all of those, or sports groups, right? But the similarities, there's so many when we draw those, because what we face, the challenges we face, the human instincts to maybe not do the best thing or to have those flaws, they're all baked in all of us, right? We're all very, very similar in so many ways. And things that faced, the decisions and the perhaps mistakes that were made during Titanic, right? Some of those are very similar today. I
Yeah.
always say that the DNA has been very consistent through history, through thousands and thousands of years. People are different in some ways. Technology changes, but the core instincts, I would humbly suggest, what makes up as people, what makes us, the good and the challenging parts, are consistent throughout history. So that's why history, I think, is so critical to examine it. Sometimes we think, oh, that was the problems they had back then, or we're more enlightened or smarter now. Well, hopefully we've learned things, right? And hopefully we've gained knowledge in different ways. But history does repeat itself often, right? And the human DNA is a pretty consistent thread that's weaved throughout history. So I think when we're honest about that and we talk about it, we see each other through that, and hopefully through the lens of the space program, they see themselves, say, that sounds like a meeting we just had. It sounds like something happening in our organization that we don't like. So what did NASA do about it? If they did something that wasn't good, well, let's not do that. But man, if they had a really good fix or something good for it, maybe try to emulate that and bring that into their culture.
Well, and I think it is so incredible when you think about the types of organizations that you just said, whether it's construction or restaurants or hospitals. It's talking about the harder things and the failures. It makes you so vulnerable and just that history. But I do have to share one thing that also just popped into my mind again. So it's funny for this conversation, Mike, there's so many things I haven't thought about my own life. So thank you for that. But my parents were very much into history and family history and nostalgia and way before ancestry.com was a thing. They were really into that and that documentation of things. And so I think that influenced me and kind of my role, which is I ask a lot of questions. I'm very curious. History is very important to me and documentation. So it is, I think all of those things are kind of, we're so fast in our pace of work right now in life that we just don't pause to reflect on that. But I want to ask a question really quick. So thank you for letting me go down memory lane on that one. Um,
Absolutely.
but when you think about, since you do a lot of speaking, what has been the most unexpected thing somebody has said to you after listening? Because you shared a couple, which was that just it is, you're vulnerable. But what's something that's maybe unexpected that you're like, wow, I didn't know that would resonate, or a story that somebody came back with? Like anything stand out on that?
Yeah, I've had those moments quite often, Elisa, and they just hit you, right? They hit you because it's so humbling. One of the best parts I love is when I give a talk and you may have to maybe for an hour on stage or speaking, and you get off stage. And one of my favorite parts, I mean, it's nice to do that. It's an honor and a privilege, and I really appreciate those opportunities. But I love when I step off the stage and I meet people, and often there's a number of people that line up that want to chat, and that is such a special time because that's now not just me talking. I want to receive information back and talk to people, and I love it. And people come up to you, and sometimes they want to tell you a very intimate, personal story about their life, something that was difficult or a challenge they had. Sometimes they want to share where they were during an accident, what it meant to them today, and often the moments where sometimes they'll reach out and just grab you and give you a hug and say thank you. And that made them reflect upon a difficult moment in their life, or maybe gave them inspiration through a story of something now they know what to do going forward, or an idea of how to fix a problem that was weighing on their mind. And when you have those moments, you lose you lose your breath for a second. And I'm always so humbled and thankful that someone that first of all they spent time with me, and we're all such busy in life with so many different distractions and duties and obligations and other things in life. So when they take time to give me the privilege to share things with them in an audience, and then they take even more time to maybe take a few minutes in line to share some things with me, it's tremendously humbling that they would do that. And then, I always say I leave those experiences enriched in so many ways. I hope I impart knowledge and information and maybe insight in ways that would help them. But every single time I've spoken, I get as much, if not more, back. Some folks will share insights or parts of their life or stories that make me think of something perhaps in a different way, help me become a better storyteller, and help me realize how important it is really to share this information with so many people out there, and what a responsibility it is to share these things and help other people. And there's no greater feeling when I get those moments and you walk out of the arena, and you reflect upon that night. Often it's hard to go to sleep for a while because you have those memories of those faces of someone that came forward and spent that time and was gracious enough to tell me their story, like you just shared your story with your mom and your dad and ancestry, to share those stories back with me. There's no greater feeling to have that human connection.
Well, and that's where I feel like, honestly, and like I said, it was 2022, but I remember it like it was yesterday that I heard you. And just to echo what you just said, the power of, people will think, that expression, it's not rocket science. Well, that is what you did. It was rocket science. But the reality of it is those applications are so true, and that reciprocity when somebody can say, it helped me get through a tough time, or it helped me think about a tough time. I mean, that's at the end of the day why it matters. And when we were talking before we turned the camera on, you were just talking. It was like I did see that NASA kid excitement, which is the fact that you're at a point now where tell us a little bit that you can share these stories more broadly now. So and you did that excitement was just so authentic of telling the world.
Yeah, it's funny. I guess they say you could take the kid out of NASA, but you can't take NASA out of the kid, right? The space program. So now I find myself, for the last 10 years, sharing these stories to a very pretty close audience of the NASA workforce, the contractor workforce, and the commercial spaceflight workforce, with a few times getting outside the gates and having this amazing feedback for folks, but not being able to share the message on a large scale because, we got the NASA mission to focus on. So now that I find myself, I've taken an early retirement for NASA, and one of the great joys of that is I'm still 100% in the space program because what I want to do is now take that message that can only resonate to a small number of folks, relatively speaking, and I want to take that now to the world. And I want to take all of these amazing stories, all these amazing experiences that can be so helpful to so many folks. I want to take that to those organizations. I want to take it to those hospitals. I want to take it to those construction companies and the banking institutions and those restaurants and those sports teams and all those other countless groups that I really would love to share those stories because I know how impactful they've been inside the gates of NASA. I've seen it resonate on the occasions we could take it outside the gates. And I really want to just really launch on a new mission, if you will, no pun intended, but to really take it around the world and really help a lot of people and do it in the memory of those that we lost and really, and again, make that sunrise happen even brighter on the other side. So I'm completely excited. I feel as excited now as I was when I got that call to come inside the gate because now I get to take the space program outside the gates with me and share it with the world. And that just really gets me excited, Lisa. So
I can
that's my
tell.
dream.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I can tell. And it's like it's this journey, the journey continues. And like you said, finding from things that were very dark moments in history and getting to the light and bringing joy. And I will tell you, again, not to say it too many times, but seeing you on stage was incredible. And I guess we were very blessed because it was 2022. And so we were privileged to be outside the gate there to see that.
That was a rare event I could take the message out. And that was, it was humbling because, as you mentioned earlier, I'm stepping on stage. I was quite nervous because this is I called it the Wimbledon, right, of the speaking world. And it was very humbling because all of the folks, all of you out there were the true professionals. And I really wanted to share an important story with a bunch of amazing storytellers. So that was really important to me to go do that, and it inspired me, yourself, Lisa, and all the others that I had the honor to meet during that experience. Inspired me to, we really do need to take this story outside the gates. We tell it to thousands, but we know we got to tell it to millions, and we've got to go do that. And so hopefully through opportunities to speak, and I also do a lot of media work. I've had the honor to work with films, work with television shows, a lot of news broadcasts, a podcast like this one, which was awesome, books. There's been several books collaborated on, and newspapers, and so many different mediums. I'm now excited to go through not only the opportunities to be on stage, but to take it through media, which even broadens the aperture
Which
the
is
range you can reach, and now share it to truly hit those millions of numbers to really help the world. So that excites me so much.
yeah, I think it's just tremendous. And I'm happy to be a small part to help amplify your message because it truly is powerful. And I have to say, I love your company name, which is called Rocket Studio. It made me smile when I saw your email. I was like, Rocket Studio, it's awesome. But we'll make sure to put the all of your contact information in the link so people can actually reach out to you. And I encourage everybody to reach out to Mike because the stories are powerful, amazing. Whether it's a big group or a small group, the stories need to be shared. They do need to be shared. And I do want to just close with at the end of the day, and I can kind of guess where you might go with this, but like, what do you want that legacy for Mike to be at the end of the day?
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess it's a sign of getting older, right? You start thinking of legacy. You start thinking of your career going forward. Now you're kind of looking back a little more through the rear view lens. Although we got a lot of forward direction to go yet. Um, you know, I truly mean this. If I can contribute in any way to make the world a better place, and it sounds cliche maybe to say that, but I truly mean that. I've seen these lessons help people. I've gotten the messages from companies. I've got the notes, the private notes. I've had those private phone calls where someone calls up and says, "You really made a difference. You helped us." And by us, I mean the NASA story. I've never been more than humbly affected by those moments, that you could help someone else through a difficult time. I've been through a lot of difficult times in my life too, and having someone reach out to help you through that might have been through those 5.5 years of the encouragement from my parents and other folks to say, "Hey, hang in there, it's going to work." When you had those difficult moments, those maybe stuck moments of, is this going to happen or not? Or the moments where you had difficult tragedies, like when we lost our crews. Um, I've been through those as well. And somebody that reaches out with a kind smile or helpful words to get you through those moments, to get you to that next sunrise. I've never forgotten those and those people that have helped me there. So if I can be one of those rays of light coming through that helps folks in organizations, or individually, that helps them get through those dark moments or prevent those dark moments, and help them in a positive way. There's nothing more rewarding than that. And I truly mean that. So that's my goal, is to remember that someone that did his best to help other folks, that would make me really happy.
Well, and just the idea to shine a light and be that little ray of light is just beautiful. So that is a beautiful way to end this episode, Mike. And again, thank you. I know you are super busy. In fact, you're doing some TV, something with Australia later today.
Yeah,
So I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule and sharing your stories. And again, for everybody listening, I will make sure to put all of Mike's contact information. Do you want to just do a shout out to like your email that if they want to reach out to you?
absolutely. So you can find me currently on LinkedIn. If you type in my last name in the LinkedIn, I've got a LinkedIn account. You can definitely reach out to me and connect. I would love that. We're in the midst of finalizing a brand new website. So it's going to be MikeCiannilli.com. So that's going to be coming to you in the next couple of weeks. That'll be here about Thanksgiving time. So this really robust website with a lot of my media content on it, a lot of the speaking content, and stories. So I think hopefully you'll find that hopefully helpful,
Great.
as well for yourselves. And Lisa, I want to thank you as well, because in the title of your podcast, bringing the joy. Joy is so important in life. Joy is something that we get every time we launch a rocket or do things, explore the universe. It's all to make things for the better. So you helping share that story through folks like myself, and because it really is about bringing joy. Again, difficult times and stories, but it's really about bringing joy and bringing life, and the excitement of life and the discovery of life and that journey, which is so amazing. Bringing that to folks in the world. So your podcast is perfectly titled,
I
and
love
thank you for
that.
maybe be a part of that with your audience, to
Yes.
bring that forward as well.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Ah, made my day, Mike. Thank you so much. And I can't wait to do this again.
Absolutely, I can't wait either. Thank you.
Thank you.